The quiet human in Room 7, the interstellar diplomatic shuttle Virex Dawn, drifted through the velvet dark of deep space, its hull glowing faintly against the stars. It was not a warship, though many of its passengers had brought weapons. It was not a prison, though some aboard believed they were surrounded by enemies. It was, officially, a place of peace, where empires and species that had once fought now sat beside each other in careful silence. The corridors were long and cold. The walls pulsed with soft blue light like a heartbeat trying too hard to stay calm. Somewhere in the crew deck just outside the diplomatic wing, a young alien noblewoman stood frozen. She was tall, elegant, silver-skinned, with eyes that shimmered like polished obsidian. Her name was Zalvara, the daughter of the 13th House of Krandal, first heir to the Tide Throne. She had broken hearts across 7 galaxies and left scars across 3 more. No one said no to Zalvara, not soldiers, not leaders, not other royal heirs, but she was not staring at royalty now. Her black eyes were locked on a door, simple, gray, labeled only Room 7, restricted. Behind that door was a human, not a diplomat, not a warrior, not a representative of the Earth, councils, or the sole protectorate, just a human, quiet, calm, always alone, and worst of all, unafraid. Zalvara's voice was cold and sharp as crystal as she turned to the officer beside her. "Why is he still here?" she asked. The officer, a nervous lizard-skinned Krath named Rulin, twitched his tail once and didn't meet her gaze. "Diplomatic clearance," he muttered. "From the preemptive Peace Corps, signed by 7 coalition empires. We can't touch him." Zalvara's jaw tightened. Her breath misted in the cold air. "He's dangerous," she said. Rulin didn't argue. The door to Room 7 remained closed. They whispered about the human in the mess hall, in the hydro deck, in the low-light meditation chambers where species went to scream their nightmares into void-proof silence. His name was Silas. No one knew his rank. No one knew what he had done. But they all agreed on one thing. He had arrived last. And when he came aboard, the silence had changed. There were things the translators couldn't explain. The scent of the air around him felt too still. Plants near his path curled just slightly inward like they didn't want to be seen. And animals, even the artificial comfort pets programmed for therapy, refused to go near him. They whined. They shivered. One time, a guard tried to escort Silas to the upper level. The next morning, that guard submitted a transfer request to an uninhabited mining colony and left without speaking a word. Zalvara waited 3 days. On the 4th, she walked straight into the central command chamber and spoke with the shuttle's highest-ranking officer, Admiral Ithrek. He was a Warforged veteran of the Zethron campaigns and had survived battles that turned planets into ashes. When Zalvara told him she wanted the human gone, he did not look surprised. But he said only one thing. "I cannot order him off this vessel," he said. "I do not control him." Zalvara narrowed her eyes. "Then who does?" Ithrek looked up from the holomap. "Something older than this galaxy." On the 6th day, Zalvara broke protocol. She walked to Room 7, alone, no guards, no witnesses, and she knocked. The door opened instantly. It should not have. It was restricted and she had not entered any code, but it opened. Slow. Soundless. Silas stood there. He was average height, maybe slightly taller. His clothes were plain, gray shirt, black pants, boots polished but worn. No markings, no insignia, no weapons. His face was calm. Too calm. Like he had never been afraid of anything. Zalvara felt something in her throat tighten. Silas looked at her. He did not bow. He did not flinch. He just said, "You shouldn't be here." Zalvara stepped inside. "I decide where I go." Silas didn't argue, but something in the room changed. The lights dimmed, just a little. The hum of the ship's core seemed to fade. It felt wrong, like stepping into a place memory couldn't follow. You think I'm a threat, Silas said. You're right. Zalvara's smile was sharp. Finally, honesty. Silas turned away from her and sat back on the edge of his bunk. You're not afraid of me yet. The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. Zalvara crossed her arms. I'm not afraid of humans. I've fought them, killed them. Silas's voice was quieter now. You haven't fought me. Something cold touched her bones then, a flicker of instinct, ancient and wordless, a warning she didn't understand. Silas looked up at her, eyes dark and steady. There's a reason they put me here, he said. Away from the others, away from the core, away from the bridge. Zalvara's voice was firm. You will. Leave this ship or I will make you leave. Silas smiled. Then everything dies. 2 hours later, emergency alarms rang across the Virex Dawn. Oxygen fluctuations in the lower decks. Data corruption in the navigation core. Biosign readings spiking in room 7. Zalvara was already on her way when the lights began to flicker. She reached the door, but it was open now. Wide and inside, Silas was gone. But something else was moving in the shadows. It looked like him. It sounded like him. But it wasn't him. Not anymore. The next day, a message was sent from the shuttle. Simple transmission, 7 words. He has awakened, you were too late. Then silence. The thing that wore his face, the lights on the Virex Dawn, no longer pulsed in time with the ship's artificial heartbeat. They flickered, jittered, blinked out of sequence, like the vessel itself had started to forget how to breathe. Somewhere deep in the core, machines whispered errors in dead languages. Doors hissed open when no one approached them. Walls grew cold where they were meant to radiate warmth. And the silence between those malfunctions felt heavier now, like something ancient was listening. Zalvara did not sleep. She sat in her quarters, back rigid, eyes locked on the shifting symbols glowing across her private data slate. They pulsed. Red threat unknown. Source: Room 7. Except Silas wasn't there anymore. He had vanished, without breaking a single lock, without tripping a single alarm. No blood, no footprints, no heat signatures, only that whisper sent across the emergency channel, repeated over and over again in a language no translator could decode. But Zalvara understood it. Somehow, she understood. He has awakened. You were too late. The search teams found nothing, not the elite guards with phase rifles, not the scanners tuned to pick up molecular drift, not even the scent trackers from the insectoid colonies who could smell sorrow through steel. Nothing. But some of them started, changing. First, one of the guards, Sergeant Yallen, stared too long into the shadows near the gravity stabilizers. When they called his name, he turned slowly, smiled with a face that didn't quite fit, and walked into the black. They never found him again. Then an engineer on Deck 11 cut the power to the lower vents. He said he was making it quiet for the old one. Then he ripped out his own eyes. Zalvara read every report. She didn't blink once. She went to room 7 again. This time, she went alone, not out of pride, but because no one else would follow. The hallway was darker now. The emergency lights gave off a sickly green glow, flickering against the walls like underwater fire. Every step felt heavier, like gravity had grown teeth and was pulling her down. The door was open, but the room was wrong. It was deeper than before. Impossible. The dimensions had changed. What had once been a small sleeping quarters was now a massive space of black stone and humming silence. The walls pulsed faintly with something alive, and at the center stood a mirror, tall, ancient, and wrong. Not glass, not metal, something else. And in it, she saw him, Silas, or what he had become. He stood behind the mirror, or inside it. His reflection was perfect, his smile calm, his eyes quiet. But his presence was all wrong. There was a delay, a slowness, like he was choosing to be seen, not actually there. Zalvara stepped closer, The air smelled like burnt flowers. "What are you?" she asked softly. Silas tilted his head. "You already know. You're not human." "No," he said. "I am." She flinched. "This is what they forgot," he whispered. "What they buried. What they tried to erase. The first ones. The deep memory. The scream beneath the stars." The mirror rippled. Salvara reached for her blade. And then, a hand pressed against the mirror from inside. It wasn't Silas's hand. It was larger, older, long, pale fingers tipped with claws that shimmered with veins of starlight and void. It left frost on the surface. Then another hand, then a second face, not human, not describable. The reflection behind Silas had teeth made of silence. "This ship is not safe anymore," Silas said. Salvara raised her weapon. "You've become the threat," Silas smiled again. Not with cruelty. With regret. "No," he said. "I am the warning." The mirror shattered. Alarm screamed. Not from any console or system, but from the crew, the survivors. They all heard it. In their minds. One thought, one message, one voice. "You let it out." The shuttle began to drift. Its engine still worked, but the navigation core no longer responded. The stars outside twisted. Some said they were no longer stars, but eyes. Others locked themselves inside the storage bays and muttered stories from their childhoods, tales of old things, forbidden myths, legends their species had outlawed for a reason. And in the medbay, a diplomat began speaking Earth's ancient dead languages in his sleep, languages he had never studied. When he woke, his mouth was bleeding. He didn't know why. Salvara gathered what was left of the command staff. 4 beings, all terrified. They demanded answers. She told them everything about Silas, about the room, about what she saw in the mirror. Only one of them believed her. Admiral Ithrek. He sat back slowly, stared at the flickering holomap, and finally said, "It wasn't supposed to be him." Salvara turned. "What do you mean?" Ithrek looked up at her. "We thought the humans had sealed them away, that the line was broken, that the blood had thinned. But he paused. He still remembers. Deep in the darkened core, something began crawling through the vents. Too large, too wrong. But it made no sound, except when it passed near power lines. Then the lights flickered, and the walls bled. They tried to call for help. No signals left the shuttle, no frequencies worked except one, a low, cold hum, broadcasting one word across the void, again and again. Remember. By the end of day 7, the Virex Dawn was no longer visible on any galactic scanner, but inside, they were still alive. Some of them. Salvara sat alone in the command center, watching the mirror fragment she had taken from room 7. Her reflection was wrong now. Sometimes, when she blinked, it didn't. And behind her eyes, a voice whispered, "He didn't change. He returned." Echoes from the blood the Virex Dawn was no longer drifting through space. It was sinking through something far worse. To the outside eye, if any ship had managed to find them, it would look as if the diplomatic shuttle had vanished into a shadow, a rift of silent dark, folding around it like a wound that refused to heal. Inside, the crew still breathed, still moved, still felt. But time stretched, space twisted, and memories bled. Doors no longer led to the same corridors. Some led to places that had never existed. Some led back into memories. Some didn't lead out. Salvara had stopped sleeping 3 cycles ago. She didn't trust what she saw when she closed her eyes. Not after the mirror, not after the voice, and not after what Admiral Ithrek had shown her. It was a recording. A restricted human data file, decrypted by force using forbidden Crandall algorithms. A file buried so deep it had no title, only an old Earth symbol, a snake eating its own tail. The file began with silence, then a voice, flat, emotionless, ancient. Project Harrogate, Alpha Clearance. If you're hearing this, the chain has broken. The lock has failed. Then came images. Earth. But not now. Not the shining diplomatic world the galaxy had come to respect. This was something older. Cities built around monoliths. Oceans that recoiled from light. Skies filled with spirals. And at the center, humans kneeling before structures that shimmered with shapes no mind should have held. The file ended with a message. 5 words. They were never just human. Ithrek had looked at Zalvara with eyes full of exhausted truth. He's not the first, he whispered. Zalvara couldn't breathe. What were they? Ithrek's voice broke. We don't know. We only know they made something sleep. Something under the skin of the universe. And when humans forget their past, it sleeps with them. But if even one remembers... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Something was crawling in the memory. Archives now, Zalvara ordered the systems purged. The AI refused. Its final message before going silent was a question. Do you see it too? After that, the doors to the archive locked from the inside. No one had entered. But they heard someone knocking. Deck 6 collapsed into itself. Literally. One moment it was there. The next, gone. And in its place, a vertical shaft lined with living, walls pulsing with breath, whispering names in no known language. 2 crew members were lost. One returned, but she would not speak. Not until she began screaming in her sleep. Not until they peeled back her skin to find a second mouth beneath. Mouth that whispered, he is waking from inside. Zalvara found Silas again on Deck 0. It was a level that didn't exist, not in any schematic, not in any record. But when she stepped into the elevator and pressed no button at all, it took her there. The doors opened into a space of darkness and lightless wind. She walked through it like a dream, and there, standing on nothing, watching a broken star collapse in on itself behind a veil of time, was Silas. He didn't turn when she approached. His voice reached her like a memory. You keep looking at me like I changed. She stayed silent. He finally turned. But this is what I always was. Zalvara stepped closer, against every instinct, every scream inside her bones. Why now? She asked. Why you? Silas didn't smile this time. He looked tired. Infinitely tired. Because something is waking in the dark between stars. And it remembers us. It remembers me. He pointed into the collapsing void. Zalvara looked. She saw herself. Younger. A child. Standing in the crypt gardens of her homeworld, staring at an ancient book her mother had said was forbidden. The title was in human script. But she'd never told anyone. Not until now. You read it too, Silas whispered. You called to it. Zalvara stumbled backward. That's not possible. It's not about possibility, Silas said. It's about blood, memory, infection. You wanted to understand humans. Now you do. The void behind him pulsed. Once and something answered. Something not alive but never dead. A voice of ash and static filled the air. She has seen. Now she remembers. Now she belongs. Zalvara awoke in her quarters. No idea how she got there. A whisper echoing in her mind. You are part of it now. She looked at her reflection. This time, the thing behind her didn't wait for her to blink. It just smiled. Meanwhile, across the ship, Admiral Ithrek was dying, not from wounds but from knowing. His memories were unraveling. Each time he remembered Earth, he saw different cities, different skies, different rules. His final log, found days later, was corrupted. Except for one line. We thought the humans were rising. We never realized they were returning. That night the crew gathered in silence in the central chamber. Drawn there, none knew why. Even the ones who had hidden. Even the ones who had sworn to never look at Silas again. And he was there, standing in the center, eyes closed, not speaking, but they all heard the same thought. It's inside you now. When the lights finally died, they saw the truth. It was never about Silas. It was about them, what he had awakened in everyone else. And now, no one could stop it. The human god buried inside him, the stars were no longer stars. Outside the Virex dawn, they had begun to shift. Slowly at first, then with purpose. Entire constellations rearranged themselves into patterns that had no names in any language. Observers, who dared look directly into the viewport windows, reported visions of eyes opening between galaxies, mouths forming from asteroid belts, and structures, impossibly massive, drifting closer with shapes that made no sense. One Zithari navigator whispered a single word before he clawed out his visual cortex. Alignment. Then he wept and stopped breathing. Salvara could no longer trust time. It moved differently aboard the ship now. Clocks reset without reason. Corridors that once took 10 steps now stretched for hours. Food supplies spoiled, even when sealed. And worst of all, memories began overlapping. She'd walk into a room and find herself already there. Sometimes her double was smiling. Sometimes it wasn't her at all. She had tried to keep the crew together, to hold on to rank, duty, purpose. But Silas had unraveled everything. Not by violence, not by command, by simply being. By awakening what had always been waiting. She understood now what Admiral Ithrek had meant before he disappeared into the silence. This wasn't about a human becoming dangerous. This was about a galaxy remembering something it had buried. Something it had feared. And it had worn a human face before. In the ancient days, when stars were still learning how to burn, there had been wars. Not for territory, not for resources, but for memory. A war to erase something that could not die. The humans had been the last to stand against it, not with weapons, but with sacrifice. They had offered their blood, their minds, their very identity, to build a lock made from consciousness and will, and when the final one sealed the door, he whispered, "Do not remember us." And the galaxy obeyed. Until Silas. Until now. He sat in the central chamber, his eyes closed, body still. For hours, days, no one could tell. The remaining crew circled around him in quiet reverence and fear. No one spoke. No one dared. Because the thing in Silas was waking up. They could feel it in the air. They could hear it in the soft humming sounds that now filled the halls. Whispers from before language. Salvara approached him last. Not as a warrior, not as a noble, but as someone who had seen. She knelt before him. "What are you now?" she asked. Silas opened his eyes, and for a moment, just one, she saw a galaxy die behind them. Then he answered. Not with a voice, with a memory. She stood in a vast chamber of stone and bone, beneath a red sky. She was no longer herself. She was someone else, someone who had knelt before an altar of burning stars. Across from her stood a figure robed in void, surrounded by beings with no faces, only hands raised in grief. And the figure said, "You will carry the gate. And if they ever remember, the lock will fall." Salvara screamed and woke on the floor of the chamber, her face wet with tears and ash. Silas looked down at her. "You helped build the lock," he said softly. "In another life, your blood remembers." Salvara shook. "But why me?" Silas didn't answer. He only stood, and the ship stood with him. Walls groaned, bulkheads cracked. From beneath the floor, voices rose. Not words, not songs, but emotions so old they tasted like burnt ozone and dying stars. One of the crew, an insectoid, diplomat, fell to their knees and whispered, "We are not real anymore." And then she folded in on herself. Literally, like a page in a forgotten book. Salvara gathered the last of the crew, those still sane, those who hadn't turned inward and become wrong. She looked at them. "We leave the ship," she said. "We get to the escape pods." Someone laughed, a broken sound. "And go where?" a voice asked. "Space isn't space anymore." But they moved, together, because it was the only thing they had left. As they passed through the corridor near room 7, the mirror fragments on the wall began glowing. They showed their reflections, but older, wrong, corrupted. Xalvara didn't look away. She forced herself to see, and the mirror showed her Silas, standing in a field of bones. Alone, his body torn, his soul intact. And above him, an ancient shape of impossible angles pressing against reality, begging to come through. The caption below the image was carved into the mirror. He held it back once. But he is tired now. They reached the escape deck. The pods were gone. Vanished. Not destroyed. Just never there. Xalvara collapsed to her knees. Above her, Silas appeared. Not walking. Simply arriving. He looked at the place where the pods should have been. They were never real, he said. We imagined them, Xalvara whispered. He nodded. Hope is the last lie we allow ourselves. The ship shuddered. A hole opened in the far wall, not torn by weapons or claws. Peeled, as if space itself was paper, and something had slipped a finger through. What they saw on the other side defied thought. Eyes, hands, monoliths that breathed, and at the center, a throne made of bones from creatures that had never been born. A voice echoed across the ship. Not from Silas, not from the hole, but from the stars outside. The lock is open. We remember, and we are hungry. Xalvara looked at Silas. Can you stop it? He looked back at her. No, her breath caught. But you're not a god, he said. Not anymore. Just a fragment of the one who was. He stepped into the breach and turned to face the thing that waited beyond. The crew screamed. The ship screamed. And for one blinding second, everything went white. Then silence. Total. Pure. Empty. The Virex Dawn floated in space again. The stars had returned. The systems were active. The corridors clean. The mirror gone. The crew was alive. Xalvara stood in the command center, alone. No memory of how she got there, except for one thing, a single sentence carved into the wall. You made him remember. The galaxy that forgot it was afraid. The Virex Dawn was quiet. Too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of a ship between systems, but the stillness of something holding its breath. Xalvara stood in the command center, eyes locked on the words burned into the wall. You made him remember. The lights no longer flickered. The air systems no longer whined. Everything functioned perfectly, almost deliberately, as if the ship itself was pretending to be normal, pretending it hadn't just brushed against something ancient and wrong. Xalvara reached out and touched the words with her fingers. They were warm, fresh. Whoever or whatever carved them had just left, but the sensors showed no movement, no bodies, no Silas, no crew, only her, alone, again. And then the stars began screaming. Across the galaxy, chaos unfolded, not loud, not immediate, but deep and slow, like roots pushing through stone. On the diplomatic world of Sashara Prime, a senator fell silent mid-speech. He stood motionless for 3 days before finally whispering, he walks again, and disintegrating into a fine gray dust. On the war moon of Cravon 12, the entire population simultaneously painted the same symbol in their blood, a spiral with 3 eyes. No one remembered learning it, and on a derelict human science station orbiting a neutron star, an old file marked Harrogate, Phase Omega auto-executed. After a century of dormancy, it contained only one message: the sleeper is stirring. Do not think of him. Do not speak of him. Above all, do not remember his name. But it was too late. A diplomat aboard the Virex Dawn had spoken it. Xalvara had seen it, and Silas had become it. She tried to leave. The ship let her, but the universe didn't. As the shuttle broke orbit, The stars twisted again. The same patterns from before. The ones that weren't patterns but warnings. The same impossible structures on the edge of visibility. A voice whispered in her head. You opened the wound. Zalvera turned her shuttle around. She re-entered the Virex Dawn, and there, waiting for her in the docking bay, was someone she hadn't seen in days. Admiral Ithrek. Alive, intact, but wrong. His skin glowed faintly. His eyes reflected not light, but memory. And when he spoke, it was not with his voice. He showed me, Ithrek said. He made me remember what humans were before they became small. Zalvara raised her blade. Ithrek didn't flinch. You can kill me, he said, but you'll still carry it, in your blood, in your dreams, in your truth. Zalvara lunged, her blade sank deep. Ithrek fell, but as he died, he smiled. You're already him, he whispered. And then his body melted into a pool of ink that sank into the floor, vanishing without a trace. That night, or what passed for night aboard the ship, Zalvara dreamed. She stood on a battlefield made of collapsed timelines. Entire civilizations stretched across the sky like paintings ripped in half. She was not alone. Silas stood beside her. He was younger here. Smaller. Human. Truly human. He reached out to her, his hand glowing faintly with pale fire. This is where we lost, he said. This is where they betrayed us. Zalvara saw them then. The other species. The ones, now part of the Galactic Council. Long ago they had knelt, sworn oaths. And then, when the war turned, they erased the humans from history. Every record, every myth, every warning. They buried humanity's true origin because it was too dangerous to remember. And Silas had been the last to fall, the final guardian, sealed away in flesh and blood, reborn again and again until memory failed and fear was forgotten. Zalvara looked at him. Why me? She asked again. Silas looked up at her, eyes dark with sorrow. Because you listened. She woke to the sound of sobbing. A child. But there were no children aboard the Virex Dawn. The sobbing came from room 7. Zalvera approached, slow and silent, weapon drawn. The door was ajar. Inside, the room had changed again. No longer a chamber. No longer a mirror. Now, a nursery. Small toys, a blanket, a rocking chair moving gently on its own. And in the center, him, a child. No more than 6 or 7 in human years. He looked up at her, eyes wet, not with tears, with ink. He held out his hand. They took my name, he said. Can you give it back? Zalvara reached out before she realized what she was doing. The moment she touched him, everything shattered. Now she was standing on a stage, the entire galaxy watching. She stood beside a tall, adult Silas, half human, half remembered God, looked out at the crowd, every species, every diplomat, every leader, and he said one thing. We forgave you once. Then the stars bent, and the sky peeled back, revealing what had always been hiding beneath. Not death, not power, but truth. The truth of what humans had buried in their blood, what the others had feared, what Zalvara had awakened by choosing him. And, the galaxy screamed, because it remembered. Zalvara opened her eyes on the Virex Dawn, alone, again. Message flashed on the central display. Pre-dawn protocol activated. Horizon breach. 41 minutes. Warning. Containment impossible. Then another message, handwritten on the wall in glowing script. The last gift is choice. Kneel, or remember. She turned, and behind her, Silas waited, no longer smiling, no longer silent, but becoming what he had always been. A god with no name, a memory that refused to die. And as he reached for her, she understood. She hadn't chosen him. He had chosen her, the god who never left. The Virex Dawn was no longer a ship. It was a shrine, a vessel wrapped in memory and dread, orbiting the edge of something too vast to be seen. Stars near it dimmed without dying. Space around it grew thicker, like it resisted observation. Those who tried to scan it reported no errors, but their minds broke trying to process what they saw. Some believed the ship had been pulled into another dimension. Others believed it became one. And at the center of it all stood two beings. Once known as Silas and Zalvara, but no longer. Those names belonged to the story before the awakening. Now they were something else entirely. Zalvara didn't know how long she had been standing in the command center. Time here didn't move the same. It stretched when she doubted, snapped forward when she believed, and always circled back to him. Silas stood near the viewport, or what had once been the viewport. Now it opened onto a swirling abyss. Stars pulled into spirals, ancient structures orbiting a core of living black. He was different now, not monstrous, not divine, just true. The skin of his human form still remained, but beneath it something older pulsed. It wasn't power. It was memory. The memory of what humans had been before they made the universe forget them. "They're watching," Silas said quietly. Zalvara stepped beside him. "Who?" He looked down, not at the stars, not at her, at the thing beneath them both. The ones who kept the gate. The ones who sealed it with our bones. They remember now. Zalvara's voice trembled. "So what happens next?" Silas closed his eyes. Now the galaxy must choose. Beyond the Virex dawn, broadcasts flared across known space. Messages no one had sent. Images no one had recorded. Every species, every empire, received the same vision. A man standing on a broken world, holding a key made from light and blood. Behind him, the stars twisted, and a voice said, "You broke your oath. You made them forget. Now they remember. Will you kneel, or will you awaken?" Panic followed. Worlds sealed themselves. Religions fell. New ones rose in hours. And among the chaos, one truth spread like fire. The humans had never been weak. They had been sleeping. And now one of them was awake. Zalvara stood before Silas in the chamber where the stars once hummed. Now there was only silence. "You said I was part of it," she said. "You are. But I don't understand what I'm meant to do." Silas smiled. Not kind, not cruel, just ancient. "You were never meant to do. You were meant to remember. And in remembering, you choose." He lifted his hand. And in it, a flame. Not hot. Not burning. A memory. Of a world that once stood on the edge of destruction and chose to erase itself. To protect all others from what it had become. A memory of a people who had sealed away gods inside, their children praying the locks would never be undone. And then, the flame shifted, and it became her. Zalvara, kneeling in a field of stars, blood running from her palms, chanting the names of forgotten human guardians. Not as enemies, but as allies. "You were with us before," Silas said. "And now, you can be again." She reached out, touched the flame, and in that instant, the galaxy blinked, time collapsed. Systems across the stars shut down, not from failure, from choice, from surrender. Because the memory spreading from the Virex, dawn was no longer stopping. Every star system that received the signal fell into a vision. Each saw something different. Some saw humans with eyes of fire pulling ancient horrors back into the void. Others saw Silas, alone, holding reality shut, with chains of pure will, and some saw themselves not as they were, but as they had been, when they knew the humans were gods in disguise, and they had betrayed them, not out of hate, but out of fear. On her knees, Zalvara saw everything, every betrayal, every scream, every sacrifice, and she wept, not for the galaxy, for Silas, for what he had carried, alone, across lifetimes, through pain no being should endure, and she said one word. "I remember," the stars answered. So did the thing beneath. But most importantly, Silas smiled, truly smiled, and whispered, "Then we begin again." The Virex dawn vanished. Not destroyed, not consumed, just erased. Not from history, from now, and in its place, across 1,000 skies. Children began dreaming of things they didn't understand. Old stories, old promises. Human names written in starlight. And in the heart of the void, two figures stood hand in hand. One made of memory, the other of choice. And the last message sent to the galaxy came through with no source, no translation, and no return signal. Just 4 words. He never truly left.